Part 66. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 651. The cold aura from the man in black was released without reservation, and the blood-killing intention made everyone's hearts tremble. At this time, Lin Yu didn't say anything, and directly summoned the fire unicorn. The fire unicorn stood behind Lin Yu, and the murderous aura in his body came out even more suddenly. The violent coercion made everyone's minds freeze at this moment. The suspenseful power made everyone's souls gradually tremble. At this moment, Dugu Qinghong looked at Lin Yu from a distance, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu. For some reason, Dugu Qinghong felt as if he had seen Lin Yu somewhere. At this time, Dugu Qinghong's big, watery eyes were looking up and down Lin Yu's body. After Lin Yu saw the scene at this time, he couldn't help but turn his head away slightly, and then coughed in embarrassment. After Dugu Qinghong saw this scene, he shouted loudly, "Lin Yu." After Dugu Qinghong finished speaking, Lin Yu did not answer. After Elder Dugu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he immediately remembered Lin Yu's existence. "I advise you to let me go. Don't think that you are the only one who has a beast in the realm of gods. I also have a disciple, and the beasts he carries are also in the realm of gods. If he grows up later, he will meet you. If you kill the two of us, you will definitely be left with nothing to eat." At this time, Elder Dugu said in a deep voice. At this time, he glared angrily, his eyes fixed on the man in black robe. At this moment, after hearing what Elder Dugu said, the man in black robe just felt that Elder Dugu was a little ridiculous. He waved his hand lightly, and then followed Elder gurgling, and was thrown out like a toy in an instant. It hit the ground hard, and the blue stone was instantly cracked. The man in black robe turned his head and stared at Lin Yu. The corners of his eyes and brows were filled with a gloomy look. The sense of bloodshed in his body began to gradually spread out. A cold aura began to spread. "Boy, if I don't kill you today, I'm afraid you will really think that I am afraid of you. If that's the case, then I'll let you see how powerful I am." After the man in black robe finished speaking, countless dark tentacles suddenly stretched out behind him. After those dark tentacles appeared, all the spiritual power around him was completely destroyed by those dark tentacles almost in an instant. The tentacles were swept away in this way. Dugu Qinghong quickly supported Elder Dugu. After seeing this scene, Elder Dugu's face suddenly became ugly. It was an expression of disbelief. "How is it possible? How is it possible? This is..." Elder Dugu's voice even trembled slightly. His eyes were fixed on the tentacle, and his whole body even began to tremble gradually. At this moment, Lin Yu looked at the black-robed man in front of him who suddenly stretched out countless tentacles. He just felt that this black-robed man was a bit strange, but what was strange about it specifically, even Lin Yu couldn't tell for a while. At this time, Lin Yu gently touched his chin, and then half-closed his eyes, with a bit of confusion flashing in his eyes. "It's strange, it's really strange, this." Lin Yu groped his chin and looked at it for a long time, but he could not tell the true identity of the man in black robe. The man in black robe stretched out his tentacle towards Lin Yu and grabbed him directly. "Boy, don't think that you can be arrogant just because you have a young beast on your back. How can this young guy be my opponent?" At this time, after the fire unicorn heard what the man in black robe said, he became furious and let out an angry roar. His face was completely full of gloom. At this moment, it was obvious that the fire unicorn was really angry. However, the man in black robe didn't care too much about all this. The man in black robe just stared at Huo Kailan with a smile on his face, his eyes full of contempt, and then he couldn't help but wave his hand casually. "This poor little guy dares to yell at me now? It's ridiculous and stupid." After Huo Kailan heard what the man in black robe said, he was instantly furious, and then he opened his mouth forward and spit out suddenly, and the flames shot up into the sky. That ray of fire was filled with an irresistible power of a divine beast. At this moment, when the fire started to spread towards the man in black robe, at first the man in black robe didn't pay attention at all, but as time went on, the man in black robe's face became more and more ugly. The black-robed man's brows seemed to be knitted together, and he let out a low growl. How is it possible? How could it be like this? The black-robed man's eyes were full of surprise. And after a while, the fire started to spread along the smelly feet of the man in black robes, bit by bit. A violent aura began to be released, and that violent and fierce aura made everyone's mind tremble. After seeing this scene, Dugu Qinghong's eyebrows seemed to be twisted together. Her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and her face couldn't help but slightly raised, and then she couldn't help but shook her head. No, no, Lin Yu might not be so strong, but the aura on him is indeed too similar to Lin Yu. What's going on? Dugu Qinghong murmured in a low voice. His eyes were full of confusion, and there was a bit of puzzlement between his eyebrows. At this moment, Lin Yu also subconsciously looked at Dugu Qinghong. When he saw Dugu Qinghong, he just felt that some different emotions gradually began to spread in his heart. Lin Yu couldn't help but sighed, and finally shook his head slightly. Hey, don't think too much before going up. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 652. At this time, Lin Yu looked at Dugu Qinghong's miserable appearance. He really wanted to hold Dugu Qinghong into his arms and comfort her. However, Lin Yu also knew that now this is not the time to comfort this little girl. At this time, the man in black robe never thought at first that Lin Yu could actually possess such abilities. However, the man in black robe was not a vegetarian. He just pointed his tentacles forward so suddenly. Such a crazy flick, and then the tentacle was instantly thrown out by the man in black robe. After waiting for a while, the man in black robe suddenly seemed to know something. He slowly raised his head towards Lin Yu and glanced casually, a flash of something flashing in his eyes. He looked gloomy, and then the sneer at the corner of his mouth became even more obvious. Boy, you are lucky today. I am in a good mood. I can let you go for the time being. However, if you can escape from me today, then the future may not be certain. The man in black robe looked down at Lin Yu from a high position, with a hint of gloom in his eyes. But at this time, although the man in black robe did not have much fighting intention, Lin Yu glanced at the injured Dugu Qinghong and the anger in his heart was just like this, swirling in his chest. Boy, who do you think you are? You can fight this battle whenever you want and leave whenever you want. You must leave me an explanation today. Otherwise, I will definitely not let you go. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly stepped forward, and then flew forward. At this time, Lin Yu's violent power began to be released from his body without reservation. After the man in black robe felt the terrifying power on Lin Yu's body at this moment, his face instantly turned ugly. At this time, the man in black robe never expected that Lin Yu would hold onto him like this. Put. The man in black robe snorted coldly and let out an angry roar. The bloody murderous energy in his body was released without reservation at this moment. Ha 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 ha, okay, I originally wanted to let you live, but there is a way to heaven and you won't take it, and there is no door to hell for you to throw yourself into. Since you want to die, then if I don't kill you today, I will. It's really unreasonable. The man in black robe was speeding towards Lin Yu one after another. His speed was extremely strange, and he was already in front of Lin Yu with just one breath and one breath. At this moment, the murderous aura around Lin Yu made everyone feel a little shuddering. A powerful force that made everyone's souls tremble. At this time, Su Yuyan and Ye Lengshuang seemed to be aware of the terror of the power around them, so they both jumped up at the same time, standing above the void, facing Lin Yu and the black robe. The person here just looked over. Suyuyan and Ye Langshuang saw Lin Yu and the black-robed man standing in the sky. At this moment, she suddenly frowned, and there was a kind of surprise in the corners of her eyes and brows. How is it possible? How could two such powerful people suddenly appear in the sky above the Dugu family? What is going on? Suyuyan and Ye Langshuang looked at each other like this, with a look of disbelief in the corners of their eyes and eyebrows. Their brows were slightly condensed, and the momentum on their bodies was so brand new at this moment. Exposed. At this moment, Ye Langshuang and Suyuyan seemed to have remembered something. They looked at each other, their expressions were slightly raised, and their eyebrows were somewhat solemn. No, something seems wrong. At this time, Ye Langshuang said in a deep voice, a bit of solemnity flashed across his face, and there was an unbelievable look on his brows. Ye Langshuang frowned, a bit of gloom flashed in her eyes, and her face suddenly turned cold. At this time, Suyuyan turned her head after hearing what Ye Langshuang said, glanced at Ye Langshuang, and then whispered like this, "What's wrong? Let's talk about it." At this time, after Ye Langshuang heard what Suyuyan said, a few meaningful smiles appeared on the corners of her mouth, and a trace of teasing flashed in her eyes. For the moment, don't you notice that there is a smell that is very familiar to you? Even Suyuyan had to admit how sensitive she was to a person's aura. If Ye Langshuang said she was second, then no one would dare to claim first. The great thing about Ye Langshuang, this little girl, is that no matter how a person's aura conceals and changes, she can easily see through that person's aura. But at this time, after Suyuyan heard what Ye Langshuang said, she still shook her head slightly, then turned her head, glanced at Ye Langshuang, and then said softly, "What do you mean by this? Isn't it normal for you to feel the familiar atmosphere from Dugu's family?" At this time, Ye Langshuang raised her hand and pointed towards the sky, and then a smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, with a bit of playfulness in her eyes, and then she calmly said, he said softly, "I said the familiar breath is from heaven." After Ye Langshuang finished speaking, the smile on her face became more and more obvious, and then she spoke in a deep voice, and the playfulness in the corners of her eyes and eyebrows became even more obvious. At this time, after Suyuyan heard what Ye Langshuang said, she was shocked and dumbfounded. His pupils suddenly enlarged, there was a bit of surprise in his eyes, and his face couldn't help but look like this. A sudden pick. "What did you say? How is this possible? This is impossible." At this time, Suyuyan whispered like this, and the confusion in the corner of her eyes and brows began to become more and more obvious, and her face suddenly condensed, and then she turned towards Ye Langshuang. Took a look here. At this time, Ye Langshuang suddenly smiled. "Why isn't it possible?" Suyuyan's expression condensed, and then she said in a deep voice, "There is no other reason, because we shouldn't know such a powerful person at all, right? Looking at the entire battle city, there is no such powerful person." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 653. At this moment, Suyuyan said in a deep voice, and then she half squinted her eyes, with a bit of complicated meaning flashing in her eyes. Ye Langshuang just smiled slightly, then turned her head, glanced at Suyuyan, and then spoke in a low and unhurried voice. "Nothing is impossible. You forgot about this fighting city, but there is a new little guy who is impossible for others. Maybe the new little guy can really do it, maybe." At this time, Ye Langshuang just spoke softly and unhurriedly, the smile on the corner of her mouth gradually became more obvious, and there was a bit of playfulness in her eyes. After Suyuyan heard what Ye Langshuang said, she was stunned for a moment. Her pupils suddenly enlarged, and there was a bit of surprise in her eyes, and then she took a deep breath. "How is it possible? Although that little guy is good in strength, he is still a little bit behind after all. Moreover, although the red-trained yellow sand beast on his body can reach the realm of gods, it will not be possible in the future. Based on the current situation, that little guy, there is no way this can be done. Suyuyan said in a deep voice, her voice even trembling a little, and at this time, her eyes were staring straight at Yelengshuang. At this time, Yelengshuang suddenly smiled. Yelengshuang glanced at Suyuyan with deep meaning, and the smile at the corner of her mouth was even more obvious. Everything I say is true, of course it's up to you to believe it or not, but don't blame me for not reminding you. Suyuyan's expression tightened slightly, and then she said in a deep voice, remind me of something. Be careful and don't show any clues. Curiosity killed the cat. If a powerful person like that is here to play pig and eat tiger, he is naturally willing to enjoy the fun. If you put him, this pleasure has been taken away, and I'm afraid your end will be. Yelengshuang just spoke softly and unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of her mouth at the end clearly showed a trace of amusement in her eyes. At this moment, after Suyuyan heard what Yelengshuang said, she couldn't help but take a deep breath and calm down her mood a little casually. What you said is indeed true. It seems that this matter can only be discussed in the long term for the time being. I can only give him a sideways attack. It gives me a headache. It really gives me a headache. After Suyuyan finished speaking, she gently rubbed her temples, a strange color flashed in her eyes, and her brows seemed to be knitted together. After waiting for a while, Yelengshuang couldn't help but laugh loudly, and then slowly turned around. After Suyuyan saw Yelengshuang like this, she was also curious about what Yelengshuang was going to do, so she said in a deep voice, what are you going to do? After Yelengshuang heard what Suyuyan said, she slowly turned around. She just glanced at Suyuyan, and then she spoke softly and unhurriedly. Of course, continue with the class. Anyway, there will be no trouble with that person in this battle city. Yelengshuang just spoke softly and unhurriedly, the smile at the corner of her mouth gradually became more obvious, and there was quite a bit of playfulness in her eyes. At this moment, after Suyuyan heard what Yelengshuang said, her brows couldn't help but knitted together, her face raised slightly, and then she said in a deep voice, what do you say to me? Can't understand something. At this time, Suyuyan was really confused about what Yelengshuang had done. Her eyes were fixed on Yelengshuang, and a strange color flashed across her face. After waiting for a while, Yelengshuang just waved his hand casually. At this moment, Lin Yu and the man in black robes were standing in the void. At this moment, they were standing opposite each other, glaring angrily. There was quite a bit of gloom in the corners of their eyes and brows, and a burst of blood. The anger gradually spread from the two of them. After the man in black robes saw this scene, he couldn't help but clenched his fists and stared at Lin Yu's body. The blood-colored murderous intention gradually began to spread out, and an icy aura came out, making everyone even feel a little shuddering. Today I can give you a chance, and you will be captured obediently. Today I may be able to let you go. If not, I will let you know what the price is. The reaction of the man in black robe was completely different from before. At this time, the man in black robe looked extremely crazy and arrogant. Even Lin Yu wanted to rush up and give the man in black robe a good beating when he saw it. Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood a little. He suddenly took a step forward, and the blood-killing intention in his body began to gradually spread out. The cold and violent aura made the man in black robes couldn't help but take several steps back before he managed to stabilize his body. At this time, after seeing this scene, the man in black robe began to panic slightly. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and his expression suddenly condensed. Boy, what do you mean? Are you really going to resist to the end? Lin Yu just waved his hand gently in front of him, and then thousands of rays of light shot up into the sky. Thousands of flames, like fireballs all over the sky, rushed towards the black-robed man like crazy from the body of the fire Kirin. The black-robed man was naturally not a pushover. His countless tentacles desperately slapped these fireballs, which were pushed out by the black-robed man so desperately, and countless hot breaths were emitted from the sparks all over the sky. The hot breaths even made everyone feel a chill, and they even felt as if they were about to be completely burned by the hot breath. Even though Lin Yu had tried his best to control the temperature and would not hurt ordinary people too much, when those ordinary people felt this hot breath, they still couldn't help but gradually surged with a bit of fear. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 654. Fireballs filled the sky, rushing towards the man in black robe like this. After the man in black robe saw this scene, there was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, the man in black robe also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. How is it possible? This is absolutely impossible. The sky full of fireballs stretched across the sky, giving the man in black robes the illusion that he was about to be destroyed. A layer of dense cold sweat broke out on the forehead of the man in black robe. At this time, he took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Master, the horror of the sky is beyond our imagination. I wonder if we are still. Ignore him. This guy deserves to be killed. He must be killed today, otherwise the consequences will be disastrous. The man in black robe heard the voice in his mind. After saying this, his face suddenly turned cold, and a sense of bloodshed emerged from his body. Okay, we really should kill him. After the man in black robe got the affirmative answer from his master, his face instantly became gloomy, and then he suddenly took a step forward, and the murderous aura in his body just disappeared. Started and gradually spread. The man in black robe had a blood-sucking intention surging around his body, but after the blood-killing intention spread, even Lin Yu couldn't help but be slightly stunned. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but do this. He narrowed his eyes. A bit of complexity flashed in his eyes, and then he took a deep breath. It's interesting. I didn't expect that a mere evil beast would dare to be so arrogant now. It seems that if I don't grant you today, your wish to find someone like you would be a bit unjustifiable. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly flew forward one step in front of the tower, and then a bloody murderous aura began to gradually spread from his body. The murderous aura rose into the sky and filled the space. It made everyone even feel a little shuddering. After waiting for a moment, the sense of bloodshed made everyone's hearts tremble. At this time, the pupils of those people suddenly enlarged, and there was a look of disbelief between their brows. After Elder Dugu and Dugu Qinghong felt the aura emanating from the void, they didn't know why there was always a very familiar feeling in their hearts, but when they began to recall carefully, that when I heard where the breath came from, I couldn't figure it out for a while. At this time, Lin Yu had a fire unicorn on his shoulders, and he couldn't help but subconsciously glance at Elder Dugu and Dugu Qinghong. At this time, he was naturally extremely uneasy. After all, what if he was killed now? If Elder Dugu and Dugu Qinghong find out, it will definitely be a troublesome thing. At this time, Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. And those groups of strange beasts did have some abilities, and the countless dark tentacles gradually began to spread towards Lin Yu, and began to grab them crazily. Looking at the countless tentacles, it seemed as if they wanted to completely devour Lin Yu. When Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. No, we can't stay like this forever. It seems we need to find a way to deal with this evil beast. When Lin Yu thought of this, his expression suddenly darkened, and then he used the fire Kylan's holy fire to burn off all the surrounding tentacles bit by bit. But for those tentacles, they have endless power of regeneration. Whenever Lin Yu burns them off, those tentacles will always grow back again, just like the maggots attached to the bones. No matter what Lin Yu does, it is impossible to expel it until the end. At this time, Lin Yu's face began to look a little ugly. His expression condensed, and the murderous aura in his body gradually spread. A crazy power surged, and the blood-killing intention made everyone even feel a little shuddering. But no matter how hard Lin Yu tried to completely burn out the dark tentacles in the surrounding space, in the end it was all in vain. Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, and finally half-closed his eyes. He took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. No, there's something strange about this matter. These tentacles don't seem to be emanating from that guy. Where these tentacles really extend, there should be another source. When Lin Yu thought of this, he paid all his attention to the endless tentacles extending bit by bit. When Lin Yu's consciousness extended along the tentacles to the depths of the earth, when Lin Yu saw this scene, his face was suddenly shocked, and there was a look of disbelief between his brows. How is this possible? At this moment, a dark energy, like grabbing Lin Yu's consciousness, began to wrap up Lin Yu's consciousness bit by bit, and gradually went up to Lin Yu's mind like crazy. That group of power invaded Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. When Lin Yu's sea of consciousness was invaded by that dark power, his face instantly became ugly. At this time, Lin Yu saw a dark breath in his sea of consciousness, emitting a terrifying dark light. Boy, I didn't expect you to have some ability. You actually opened up such a vast world in your sea of consciousness. This really caught me off guard. At this time, after hearing that group of voices, Lin Yu's face suddenly twisted, and a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes, and then he took a deep breath. You are really brave. You actually dared to come into my sea of consciousness. I really don't know who gave you the courage to be so brave. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chang. Chapter 655. The dark aura began to transform quietly, and after a while, it transformed into the appearance of a person, but that person had no facial features, just the outline of a human figure. That man had an air of ambiguity that made Lin Yu very disgusted. At this time, Lin Yu narrowed his eyes like this, and his eyes were fixed on that guy. Lin Yu's expression suddenly became peaceful, and the corner of his mouth only curled up into a sneer. What? Do you want to be with me, negotiate? Lin Yu just said in a deep voice, his eyes fixed on that group of black figures. A sense of bloodshed began to spread gradually, and his eyes were filled with a kind of cold color. After hearing Lin Yu say this, the smile on the face of the black energy began to gradually spread, and finally it nailed Lin Yu's body with a smile on his face. He looked up and down like this. You seem a little strange. You seem to have a different feeling from the other people I have invaded before. The smell on your body is very annoying to me. I don't like the smell on you at the moment. That mass of black energy, its eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, his face suddenly darkened, and a murderous aura began to gradually spread from his body. At this time, Lin Yu didn't bother to pay attention to this guy, and he didn't take this guy to heart at all. Really? But it seems like you can't kill me yet. I'm right. Lin Yu just spoke in a cold voice in a leisurely manner, his eyes full of mockery. The murderous aura in his body became more and more obvious, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer. But at this moment, when the black energy heard what Lin Yu said, his whole face suddenly became gloomy. He glared angrily, staring at Lin Yu, looking at the roiling blood energy. Who said I can't kill you, boy? Don't be arrogant here. I won't kill you now just because I don't want to. After all, I am still a man who cherishes talents. As long as you agree to be my subordinate now, I can consider letting you go, but if you persist and refuse to agree, then don't blame me for being rude to you. The black eyes were firmly fixed on Lin Yu's body. Their eyes were full of blood and killing intent, and the 9-point roiling murderous aura in his body was gradually spreading. Come. At this moment, in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness, the corners of Lin Yu's eyes and brows were filled with a look of contempt. If you were in the outside world, maybe with your crooked methods, I might not be your opponent, but if it were now, you wouldn't be my opponent at all now. Lin Yu said in a cold voice in a leisurely manner, his eyes full of mockery, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. But at this moment, the black energy heard Lin Yu. After saying this, the killing intent in his body began to gradually boil. Boy, you will pay for your arrogance, I say it. The ball of black energy suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu, but just when the ball of black energy was about to wrap around Lin Yu, the golden light immediately enveloped the ball of black energy. Angry. In fact, although even Lin Yu couldn't figure out what was going on with that ball of golden light, Lin Yu was willing to see the scene now. He just touched his chin so gently, and then such a smile was nailed onto that mass of black energy. It seems like you can't do anything to me. Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, after being trapped by the golden light, the black energy began to struggle desperately. At this moment, he was flying up and down, moving left and right, his eyes were full of endless fear. After Lin Yu saw this scene, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. There was a bit of mockery in his eyes, and the blood in his body began to gradually spread. Come. What? You seem to be in a very embarrassed state now. Do you want me to help you? Do you need me to let you out? At this time, Lin Yu was staring at the mass of black energy with a smile on his face. After the mass of black energy saw Lin Yu's appearance, his face instantly became ugly. At this time, he said, he let out an angry roar. Asshole, get out of my way, let me go quickly, or else. But before the black energy could finish speaking, Lin Yu's palm suddenly clenched tightly. Then, the mass of black energy let out a scream like a slaughtering pig. The expression of the mass of black energy at this moment was like this. Suddenly, it began to panic, and the eyes that looked at Lin Yu were full of with an endless fear. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu stared at the mass of black energy with a smile on his face, and then said in a cold and unhurried voice, "What? Nowadays, your temperament seems to be not enough have some." Lin Yu's voice was filled with a kind of ridicule. After seeing this scene, the group of black energy also knew that Lin Yu was a little weird. Among them, he couldn't figure out the weirdness for a while, so the wisest choice for him right now is to leave. After the black air figured this out, it did not bother with Lin Yu anymore. It just glared at Lin Yu fiercely, and then said with gritted teeth, "Today is my failure. We will live forever and see each other again." After the black air finished speaking, it suddenly disappeared in front of Lin Yu. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu couldn't help but shook his head and smiled, with a bit of mockery flashing in his eyes. "It's ridiculous, it's ridiculous. How can you come and go as you please in my territory? If so, where should my dignity be placed?" After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly clenched his fist, and then the black air was instantly crushed into powder by the golden light surrounding him. Then the black-robed man screamed. After seeing this scene, everyone was shocked at the same time. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 656. At this time, the man in black robe let out a muffled groan. Knowing that a ray of his soul was destroyed, he was naturally very uncomfortable at this time. The face of the man in black robe instantly turned pale. There was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows. He slowly raised his head and stared at Lin Yu. "Boy, you are so cruel." After Lin Yu saw this scene, he just stared at the black-robed man with a smile on his face, a bit of mockery in his eyes, and then said in a cold voice, Do you think I'm cruel? Ha ha ha, I guess not. In fact, I'm very kind, but to whomever? If it's those guys that I hate, I would naturally want to skin them and peel them off. Lin Yu said that at the end, the bloody murderous energy in his body was released without reservation. The killing intent made the man in black robe feel a little shuddering at this moment. After seeing Lin Yu like this, the man in black robe took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Okay, you are ruthless. Green hills remain unchanged and green waters always flow. There will always be a time when we meet again. When the next time comes, I will actually skin you, peel off your bones, crush your bones and spread your ashes. After the man in black robe finished speaking, he suddenly and quietly retracted all the tentacles he had extended out in almost an instant, and then immediately walked away without even turning his head back. Lin Yu was relieved when he saw this scene. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the direction where the man in black robe disappeared. After looking for a long time, he finally came back to his senses. And at this moment, before the man in black robe left, the man in black robe threw a soul cone at Dugu Qinghong. Dugu Qinghong fell sharply without any reaction and was stabbed by the soul all. Lin Yu never expected that the man in black robe would actually kill a carbine. Under his negligence, Dugu Qinghong was also injured by the man in black robe. When Lin Yu saw this scene, he was furious. He roared, "Asshole, let's see if I don't kill you." Lin Yu gathered a ball of Kylin holy fire in the palm of his hand, and then threw the ball of Kylin holy fire heavily towards the back of the black-robed man. When this ball of unicorn holy fire hit the black-robed man, the black-robed man let out a muffled groan, and then rushed forward. At this time, the corners of the black-robed man's mouth just curled up. He gave a sneer, and a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes. "Boy, how is it possible to kill me? I won't continue to play with you today. Goodbye." After the man in black robe finished speaking, he suddenly flew forward and disappeared in front of Lin Yu in just one breath. After escaping for an unknown distance, the man in black robe suddenly stopped, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out. The man in black robe looked a little pale. At this time, he began to sit cross-legged on the ground and began to repair his damaged meridians bit by bit. The man in black robe began to look paler. Then, a person slowly walked up to the man in black robe. The man's eyes were staring at the man in black robe, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. "Interesting, she is really an interesting little girl. I didn't expect that she would heal herself now. This is really unexpected." After hearing the man's voice, the man in black robe suddenly came back to his senses. Then he subconsciously took a few steps back and looked at the man with a vigilant expression. "Who are you?" At this time, the man in black robe suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. You must know that his current situation is not optimistic at all. I am afraid that if he is not careful, he will be doomed. The man heard what the man in black robe said, and then he stared at the man in black robe with a smile on his face, and there was a bit of mockery in his eyes. "Who am I? Actually, you can take a guess. Guess who I am." The man walked towards the man in black robe slowly, but every time the man took a step, the man in black robe could not help but feel his heart tremble slightly. After a moment, the man in black robe suddenly smiled. He just waved his hand casually, then turned towards the man, glanced casually, and said in a deep voice, "I don't want to say nonsense, who are you? Let's just say it." The man never expected that the man in black robe didn't look nervous at all, so at this time, the man was a little confused, and then he said in a cold voice, "Aren't you afraid? Don't you feel scared?" The man's eyes were fixed on the man in black robe, and the confusion in his heart was beyond words. At this time, the man in black robe also smiled suddenly. He just waved his hand casually, and then coughed lightly. "Ahem, you won't kill me. What I said must be right. The man in black robe said so calmly and coldly, the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of playfulness in his eyes. At this moment, the man also smiled suddenly. He just waved his hand casually, and then glared fiercely at the man in black robe, and then almost gritted his teeth. Said, "I won't kill you. I don't know where you got your confidence from, let alone who gave you this confidence, but I want you to understand that you are not absolutely safe now." After the man in black robe finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward towards the tower in front, and then immediately grabbed the man in black robe by the neck. At this time, the murderous aura in his body was just like this. The man in black robe was so shrouded. The man in black robe instantly felt a strong murderous aura surrounding him. At this time, his face turned pale for a moment, and his eyes were fixed on the man. "If you kill me, you won't get anything." A hint of death flashed in the eyes of the man in black robe. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 657. At this time, after hearing what the man in black robe said, the man actually let go of the man in black robe. He just stared at the man in black robe with a smile on his face, and his eyes were full of laughter. "It's a bit playful. Interesting. It's really interesting. But I'm very curious. I really want to hear what you have to say. What do I want to get from you? If you can answer it, I can naturally let you go. But if you can't answer it, then I'm afraid." The man paused when he said this. At this time, his eyes were filled with a kind of coldness. There was no trace of warmth in his eyes, as if they were in the extremely cold purgatory. After the man in black robe saw the man at this moment, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He just took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. "What exactly do you want to do? You tell me first. If I can agree to it, I will naturally agree. If I can't agree, then of course I will be helpless," the man in black robe said softly. Although there was no fear on his face at this moment, his heart could be said to have hit rock bottom. When the man heard what he said, the man in black robe just sneered, "It's very simple, I just want you to help me find someone." After the man in black robe heard what the man said, his whole person was filled with a kind of confusion. His eyes were fixed on the man, and his expression tightened slightly. "Looking for someone? Who are you looking for?" The man in black robe stared straight at the man, and then whispered like this. The man just waved his hand, and then a beautiful figure appeared. At this time, after the man in black robe saw this beautiful figure, he felt a little confused in his heart. If I'm not wrong, this should be a Greek goddess from ancient times. What are you doing with her? The man in black robe was naturally filled with confusion. After the man heard what the man in black robe said, he just turned around and glared fiercely at the man in black robe. There was a kind of coldness in his eyes. A bit of murderous aura is gradually churning. "Stop talking nonsense, just do whatever I ask you to do you understand?" the man said in a cold voice, and the blood-killing aura in his body gradually began to spread. The mysterious aura made everyone's hearts and minds shake. Trembling. At this moment, after the man in black robe felt the bone-chilling chill on the man's body, he naturally did not dare to make any more mistakes at this moment. At this moment, he nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice. "Well." The man nodded with satisfaction, and then disappeared directly in front of the black-robed man in the next second. After the man disappeared, the black-robed man also breathed a sigh of relief. But at this moment, after the man in black robe left, Lin Yu hurriedly came to Dugu Qinghong's side without saying a word, and hugged Dugu Qinghong in his arms. He used the strength in his body began to pay attention to Dugu Qinghong's body bit by bit. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes and brows were full of concern. His eyes were fixed on Dugu Qinghong, and then he turned to himself. The power began to move towards Dugu King Hong's body bit by bit, so lost. At this time, after Elder Dugu saw this scene, a bit of confusion flashed across his eyes and brows. Elder Dugu turned his head, just glanced at Lin Yu, and then said softly, "I wonder if this gentleman knows my little girl." After Elder Dugu's voice sounded, Lin Yu began to realize that his behavior seemed a bit abnormal. Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood a little. At this time, he also smiled like this, and then turned his head and looked towards Elder Dugu. "Take a look. It's just that my apprentice has been taken care of by this little friend, so naturally I want to help my apprentice and return some favors." Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, and then turned his head, glanced at Elder Dugu, and then smiled like this. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Elder Dugu felt a little confused in his heart, and there was a clear look of confusion in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, after Elder Dugu thought for a long time, he could not find a suitable candidate for the apprentice that Lin Yu said. Dugu narrowed his eyes like an elder, and a bit of confusion flashed through his heart. His brows seemed to be knitted together, and then he turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. Smiled. "I don't know who the apprentice this gentleman is talking about is. If you don't mind, sir, I might as well tell you." Elder Dugu just stared at Lin Yu, and then said with a smile on his face. After Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he couldn't help but cough lightly. "Ahem, it's not someone else, it's Lin Yu." When Elder Dugu heard what Lin Yu said, he suddenly realized something. At this time, his heart was also in the valley. After all, now Lin Yu has such a powerful master for no reason. Now if he wants to secretly take the red-striped yellow sand beast from Lin Yu, it may be really difficult. At this time, Elder Dugu looked at Lin Yu, and then smiled. "Ha ha ha, it turned out to be little friend Lin Yu. I was wondering why little friend Lin Yu was able to hatch this red-striped yellow sand beast at the beginning. It turns out that all this is because of this master and disciple." At this time, Elder Dugu's face began to become more and more ugly, but at this time he still had to show a very excited look, but the smile on Elder Dugu's face at this time looked even uglier than crying. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 658. At this time, Lin Yu nodded slightly, and then waved his hand casually. "This is nothing, but this little girl's situation seems to be a little bad. I have used my spiritual power to stabilize this little girl's soul, but the current situation still does not seem to allow for any optimism. Wait until I get back to read the ancient books, and then make the next plan." Lin Yu just said so softly, with a somewhat complicated look flashing in his eyes. At this moment, after Elder Dugu heard what Lin Yu said, he was also ecstatic, and then he fell to his knees on the ground. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. If it weren't for you this time, I'm afraid my little girl would." Elder Dugu paused when he said this. At this time, Elder Dugu's words were quite excited. At this time, Elder Dugu even started to cry in explanation. At this time, Lin Yu quickly helped Elder Dugu up, and then waved his hand casually. He sighed, with a somewhat complicated look in his eyes. "Hey, Elder Dugu doesn't need to be so excited. After all, she also helped my disciple back then, so I'll leave for now." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he took a step forward, and then disappeared directly in front of Elder Dugu. Elder Dugu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's back, with a complete look in his eyes. The excitement in his short-sighted eyes and the slight smile on his lips were simply beyond words. "Great, Qinghong, you can be saved this time." At this time, Elder Dugu's voice even trembled slightly. He turned his head and stared directly at Dugu Qinghong. The excitement between his eyebrows was naturally silent. And metaphor. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu ducked into a forest. At this time, after Lin Yu got into the woods, his face suddenly became ugly. The calmness he had before, he was all pretending. He just didn't want others to see that he had a close relationship with Dugu Qinghong. At this time, Lin Yu's face flashed with a bit of solemnity, and then he took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. No, we can't just let this matter go. We must find a way this time, we must find a way to save that little girl. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were quite firm. At this moment, he clenched his fists, and the corners of his eyes and brows filled up with a look of firmness. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu quickly held his breath and concentrated, returned to his sea of consciousness, and found Arya. Arya, Arya, tell me quickly, what is going on? Is there any solution? At this time, Lin Yu was so excited that his words were somewhat incoherent, and his voice even trembled slightly at this time. When Arya heard Lin Yu say this, she appeared in front of Lin Yu in an instant, and then spoke to Lin Yu softly. Based on the current situation, it seems that there is really no effective way. After all, your authority is too low now, and there is no way to redeem the elixir to cure Miss Dugu Qinghong, but... Arya paused immediately after saying this. Her face was quite tangled, and she didn't know what she was thinking. At this time, Lin Yu took a deep breath, then turned around, glared fiercely at Arya, clenched his fists, and then turned around like an angry man. Like a wild beast, it roared loudly at Arya. I know you must have a solution. Tell me the solution quickly. Tell me the solution quickly. Do you hear me? At this time, Lin Yu was even a little incoherent. His eyes widened with anger, and his eyes were fixed on Arya, with a bit of solemnity flashing in his eyes. At this moment, Arya heard Lin Yu say this, and there was a bit of a wry smile on the corner of her mouth, and then she let out a long sigh. Oh, there is indeed a way, that is, you can pass 100 million points, redeem the Book of the God of Medicine. Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, with a bit of confusion in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly, and then said softly, the Book of the God of Medicine? Is that a what is it? Can you explain it in detail? Lin Yu spoke softly like this, his eyes staring straight at Arya, and the confusion in the corners of his eyes and brows became more and more obvious. At this time, Arya just smiled like this, since you asked, then I have no reason not to tell you. The magic of this Book of the God of Medicine is that you can know at a glance what is happening here. The antidote to the poison it contains. After Lin Yu heard what Arya said, he immediately turned his head, glanced in Arya's direction, and then spoke softly. But didn't you just say that I can only take a look and know the treatment methods for the illnesses recorded in it? I don't seem to have any way to know the treatment methods for those that are not recorded, right? Lin Yu stared straight at Arya, a complicated meaning flashed in the corners of his eyes and brows, and then he half closed his eyes. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, Arya was slightly startled at first, then she pondered for a moment, and then a wry smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. What you said seems to be true, but according to the current situation, there is no way for you to know the way to save the poison that Miss Dugu was poisoned by. So now you can only buy the Book of the God of Medicine and try it? If you're lucky, there's no other way. Arya stared at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, then spoke softly, and then stared at Lin Yu with her eyes. After Lin Yu heard what Arya said, 3 black lines suddenly appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. At this time, he took a deep breath, and then calmed down slightly. Check your own mood. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 659. At this time, Lin Yu heard Arya. After saying this, he was stunned for an instant. He sighed, and then nodded. What you said is true. I admit that what you said is not wrong at all. If this is the case, then I have nothing to say. I will redeem the book of the god of medicine. As soon as Lin Yu finished speaking, he heard a clear and sweet female voice in his mind. Ding, congratulations to the host for successfully redeeming the book of the god of medicine. Immediately afterwards, Lin Yu felt a golden light that directly entered his mind. At this time, his eyes suddenly flashed with a sense of transparency. At this time, Lin Yu felt countless things, as if he was frantically trying to hold them in his mind. At this moment, his face was full of excitement, and the corners of his mouth were full of excitement. His smile became more and more obvious. Great, in this case, that little girl may be saved. At this time, Lin Yu's face flashed with excitement, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu also came back to his senses. He suddenly remembered what happened before, and then he frowned, and then without saying a word, he suddenly turned in the previous direction. Fly away. Lin Yu's speed was not slow. In just a blink of an eye, he had already arrived at a place. At this time, after Lin Yu arrived here, he just looked up and down, and there was a somewhat complicated meaning in his eyes. But waiting for the next second, Lin Yu suddenly realized that something was wrong with this matter. At this moment, he suddenly screamed in his heart that it was not good, and then he was ready to get out. Fall back. But no matter how much Lin Yu wanted to get away, the speed of the light and shadow at this time was indeed very fast. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face suddenly became ugly, and he subconsciously turned towards the person next to him, suddenly turned sideways, and then he forcibly avoided the light and shadow. At this moment, Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. He half squinted his eyes and glanced forward, with a bit of coldness flashing in his eyes. Interesting, it's really interesting. Since you're already here, why don't you show up? There was a certain gloominess in Lin Yu's voice, and the murderous aura in his body was even more stern. And at this moment, a man walked out slowly. The man looked up and down Lin Yu's body like this, with a sneer at the corner of his mouth. I didn't expect you kid to actually be able to discover me. This is really something I didn't expect. But even if you can discover me, what can you do? It's still a bit of a challenge. The man said in a cold and unhurried voice, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu's body, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this moment, after Lin Yu heard what the man said, his face suddenly turned cold, and the murderous aura in his body became even more stern. Really? Since I can find you, I can naturally kill you. Killing you is just as easy as killing a dog. Lin Yu almost gritted his teeth as he spoke, and the blood-killing aura in his body began to spread. After feeling Lin Yu's aura, the man's expression suddenly turned ugly. He subconsciously took a few steps back, staring at Lin Yu. Boy, you are really quite capable. I really didn't expect this. Lin Yu just waved his hand, and then shook his head and smiled. Really? Then I'm afraid there are many things you didn't expect. At this time, Lin Yu didn't say a word, but took a still step forward, and then the fire unicorn behind him suddenly appeared, and that violent murderous aura made people's minds couldn't help but start to tremble suddenly. After the fire Kylan appeared, he saw the man's eyes at this moment, and a bit of panic flashed through his eyes. The man moved forward one after another, and after taking several steps back, he finally regained his composure. He froze, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. This is the fire Kylan? Why does this fire Kylan appear in your hand? How is this possible? The man's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and the corners of his eyes and brows were full of surprise. His eyes looking at Lin Yu were also full of confusion. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the guy said, he suddenly smiled. There was a bit of joking and a bit of ridicule in that smile. Then you can take a guess. Why did this fire unicorn appear in my hand? Lin Yu just said it in a cold voice in a leisurely manner, looking at the man with a kind of mockery in his eyes, and a sneer at the corner of his mouth. At this moment, the man suddenly took a step forward, and then opened his eyes angrily, staring at Lin Yu. Although I don't know exactly what happened, I think it definitely happened because of you, so this time, I can only offend you. The man suddenly took a step forward, and then a ball of jet black gas appeared behind him. The jet black gas swirled around little by little, then, he immediately wrapped himself up towards Lin Yu. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu was as confused as the 2-foot-tall monk. His eyes were staring straight at the dark ink-like gas in front of him, and his brows were more like frowning. Like together. What the hell is this blob? At this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, then half closed his eyes and said coldly. But after Lin Yu thought for a long time, he still didn't understand what was going on with this ball of gas. He just pondered for a moment and then shook his head. No, something's wrong, this gas is a little strange. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 660. These should be dark beasts. This dark beast has no entity at all. It is usually made of gas. It can swallow everything and turn it into its own power. It is very terrifying and incomprehensible. At this time, Arya's voice suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's mind. When Lin Yu heard what Arya said, his face turned slightly ugly. At this time, he gently touched his chin, and then he couldn't help but half squinted his eyes. Dark beast? Why are there such strange things in this world? Lin Yu just spoke so softly, with a bit of confusion in his words. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, Arya couldn't help but hide her face, let out a cute smile, and then sighed quietly. Well, this dark beast is indeed a bit strange, and those who can tame the dark beast can actually be regarded as weird. Arya's voice sounded quietly in Lin Yu's mind. 3 black lines appeared on Lin Yu's forehead, and he was speechless for a while. At this time, he pondered for a moment, and then took a deep breath. So Arya, how should we deal with this dark beast now? Lin Yu just said in a deep voice. After Arya heard what Lin Yu said, she hesitated for a moment, and then said in a low voice, because the attack form of this dark beast is weird and unpredictable, there is no record in the database. How to deal with this dark beast, so? Arya said, and then paused. Although Arya did not continue speaking at this time, her meaning was naturally self-evident. When Lin Yu thought of this, he felt like crying for a while, with a bitter smile on his lips, and a look of helplessness flashed in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin. Dark beast, it may not be that easy to deal with this dark beast. After Lin Yu pondered for a long time, his whole face became slightly ugly. At this time, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then others calmed down his mood slightly. At this time, the man's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and the murderous aura in his body began to gradually spread. How? Have you figured out how to die? The man's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth became even more obvious. But at this time, Lin Yu still didn't take it seriously. Lin Yu just glanced at the man, as if he was the king looking down at the sky. Looking at the man's eyes, there was even a bit of pity. Really? You want to kill me, right? Lin Yu took a step forward, and then spoke in a cold and unhurried voice. The indifference in his eyes began to become more and more obvious. At this time, Lin Yu's aura was fully revealed, and after feeling the terrifying aura on Lin Yu's body, the person's face instantly became ugly, and then he couldn't help but subconsciously take a few steps back, with a bit of fear in his eyes. At this moment, the dark beast suddenly flew towards Lin Yu. Although it only took one breath, it had completely enveloped Lin Yu. That chaotic breath, Lin Yu was so completely wrapped up that Lin Yu instantly felt a sense of chaos. Lin Yu also took a deep breath at this moment, and then waved his hands gently, "That's all. In front of my fire Kylin, who do you think you are?" After Lin Yu finished speaking, the fire unicorn spurted out a mouthful of turbid flames at that moment. That mouthful of turbid flames directly enveloped the man, causing everyone's souls to tremble suddenly. But the man began to struggle desperately, and his face began to look slightly panicked. The dark beast behind him released a turbid force. That turbid force seemed to want to completely destroy Lin Yu. Like swallowing. But at this time, Lin Yu could not be swallowed up by the dark beast so easily. The corner of his mouth just raised an evil smile, and then he could not help but shake his head slightly. "You are trying to embarrass me now with such a small skill. This is a bit ridiculous, isn't it?" Lin Yu just said in a cold voice, with a bit of contempt and ridicule in his words. It was obvious that he didn't take that guy to heart at all, but he had a condescending attitude of overlooking all living beings, which made everyone's hearts tremble. After hearing what Lin Yu said, that person couldn't help but clench his fists, and then a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes, and a murderous aura gradually began to spread from his body, and his face instantly changed. Just like that, it started to become ferocious. "Boy, if there is a way to heaven, don't take it. If there is no door to hell, you can throw yourself into it. Since you want to die, I must fulfill your wish today." After that person finished speaking, he showed his aura to Lin Yu without reservation. Then the turbid air on the dark beast instantly enveloped Lin Yu completely, causing Lin Yu's mind to tremble. Almost at that moment, Lin Yu felt that the power in his body was being drawn out bit by the dark beast. In the end, even Lin Yu's expression couldn't help but become a little flustered. He subconsciously stepped back a few steps, his face sank, and at this moment he half closed his eyes and gently rubbed his chin. "No, this dark beast seems to be a little weird, but where exactly, some weirdness even I don't know." Lin Yu just felt that the dark beast in front of him was a little strange, but as for this strange place, he couldn't say it for a while. The dark beast suddenly took a step forward, and then a murderous aura instantly spread to Lin Yu's whole body. The killing intent instantly surrounded Lin Yu, making Lin Yu even feel a little bit of fear. And the fire unicorn seemed to be a little scared.